Good morning. Good morning. I've never used that. Morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to meeting number 26 of the Parks and Environment Committee. Welcome to members of the committee and to other members. We don't have any other members here yet, but Councillor Robinson will be coming. And members of the public, thank you for coming down to the most entertaining, polite and cordial and friendly and powerful committee at City Hall. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are at in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. And the Parks and Environment Committee gratefully acknowledges it is meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much. And I just see we're going to welcome a visiting councillor, Councillor Troisi. Thanks for coming. So, can I have? Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Code Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes from February meeting. Anyone? Anyone want to confirm those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Layton. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. All right. And I will note that Councillor Carroll is no longer with our committee. I didn't want to say with us in case that sounds, but she's on to bigger and better things, I guess, hopefully. And so our committee's smaller, but quorum remains the same. So thank you all for meeting quorum today. So let's go through the agenda. PE 26.1, Allan Gardens Park and Conservatory Planning and Governance. And we do not have any depths on that. Do you want to move that? So Councillor Rosemary would like to move that. She's coming for the second one. So with that, I would just give congratulations and thank you to Adele. Where's Adele? Thank you for all your amazing work on Allan Gardens. And everyone want to applaud Adele? Not the singer, but someone even better. And that is your homework assignment this summer. Go out and tour Allan Gardens if you haven't done that. Thank you. And Councillor Rosemary moves to adopt that. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. PE 26.2, Growing the Gardens, authorization to amend and enter into agreements with Toronto Botanical Garden for master plan implementation. We're going to hold that for Councillor Robinson. That's her neck of the woods. PE 26.3, naming rights agreement with the TD Bank and High Park initiatives for the High Park Forest School.
If we,
do you want to? We'll hold that for Councillor Doucette, who's madly brokering deals to our left. PE 26.4. Update on the partnership with Evergreen and establishing the identity for the Lower Don Parklands. Does anyone want to hold that?
I would just like to speak to the item, but it won't take long.
Sure.
I just wanted to thank staff and congratulate. Sorry, this is far beyond just a renaming of this of this mega park. This is Toronto fulfilling part of its commitment to reconciliation, and by doing so, doing some pretty extraordinary placemaking around Indigenous, reclaiming Indigenous roots in our community. I won't place a motion because I know they'll do their their homework on this, but in the consultation, I look forward to bringing it to the Aboriginal Affairs Committee to get their endorsement as we move forward. But very exciting report and good direction. And
the name is? So, and for all of you who have read the report or not read the report, where's my little notes there? Waskatonash? How's that? So we all have to practice that. And that's fantastic. And as Councillor Layton says, that's thank you to the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, everyone involved, and the motion that I wrote for Indigenous placemaking in parks and staff doing all the work on that. This is groundbreaking. It's thrilling, and we want to thank Annie. Where's Annie from Evergreen? There you are. Round of applause for Annie for all her work there. Fabulous. All right, so Councillor Layton's moving adoption. Good news story. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. PE 26.5, criteria for fuel and biodiesel for the City of Toronto. We have depths on that. It's like Groundhog Day, that item. It's good. Lloyd was really thrilled with that. PE 26.6, establishing ownership of the Eastern Gap, Seawall, and adjacent lands on the Toronto Islands. We have depths on that as well. PE 26.7, Pollinator protection strategy. And it'd be great, actually, maybe we want a presentation, but maybe at council, but we have depths on that as well. Okay. So without further ado, I guess we'll go to Councillor Robinson's not here, so oh, what are you doing hiding over there? Oh, sorry, I haven't looked at my phone. Okay. Do you want to speak? No presentation, but do you want to speak about it, Jay? Councillor Robinson? Oh, sorry. You're not. But you can. Thanks. Welcome.
I just wanted to say that really to thank staff for an amazing job. This has been many years in the making. And this is a very exciting day to see this come to fruition. As most of you know, the Toronto Botanical Gardens is a gem in Toronto, and this allows it to become really a true destination for all of Toronto, but the GTA and beyond. So we're very excited about this as a community. The Toronto Botanical Gardens have been really, I don't know how to describe it. They're absolute pros. They're real experts in their field. They've got some of the best staff that I've ever crossed paths with. And this is such a great collaboration and partnership. So I just wanted to, Madam Chair, just basically say to you, thank you to the city staff who have worked on this for years. And thank you to the Toronto Botanical Gardens Board of Directors, their staff, as well as all their volunteers, because they have hundreds of volunteers who are very passionate and committed to the Toronto Botanical Gardens. So this is a big day, a big step forward, long awaited, and I just wanted to thank all the, there's no way I could cover off everybody who's been involved, but thank all the parties that have been part of this to get us here today. So thank you very much, and that's really it. Thank you to the committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor Robinson. Actually, now that you've tweaked everyone's interest, so Councillor Doucette actually has questions of staff, so we're going to go a little backwards on that, if that's okay.
Sorry about that. So questions to staff. I know the Botanical Gardens a little bit because they were before us in 2012, desperately looking for fundraising and for funds. Very impressed with what they've done here, but what I don't understand and I'm not so clear on, and I did try and go through the master plan, but to be honest, it was very in-depth and a little, it was a lot of good information there. I couldn't quite get through it all. Can you just walk me through who looks after what right now? You've got, how many acres? You've got 12 hectares, and 1.8 right now is managed by the Botanical Garden group committee. So what's happening in the rest of the park?
So there are two parts, really. The part known as the Botanical Gardens is about 4.5 acres in and around the facility itself. The city looks after the facility, that's to say the building envelope. They look after the Toronto Botanical Garden staff look after all the programming and everything happening within that envelope. They also look after the grounds immediately around that envelope, so those horticulture beds and so on that you see there and the programming that happens immediately around it. And then further out towards the west is the larger park area that's been known as Edwards Gardens. City staff look after that, and the two groups work hand in hand, more or less, trying to maximize the benefit that is received by the public by working together and cooperatively. And then there's this whole master plan which looks at the entire envelope, including lands to the south that it's connected to, and what the real potential here is. And if you look at the whole thing as a bigger potential envelope for a higher quality of horticulture and program delivery, that's where you really start to realize the big long-term benefits that this could have as a cooperative partnership.
Are the different sort of activities in the park going to be changing much in this master plan? Are we still going to have some of those, open spaces, as well as the beautiful botanical gardens, as well as the educational sections? Are we still keeping that?
Through the chair, yes. That's the intention, not only to keep it, but to expand it. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more opportunity that could be realized here as we work together. The broader, the sort of level of intensity of management that you come to love and know around the actual facility building itself, imagine that extending much further. And imagine the beauty of it and the potential for drawing all kinds of activities and special events and just general passive use and enjoyment.
Also, I did get into some of the master plan. On page 31, we're talking about structures and buildings, and some of them obviously need some tender, loving care, probably an understatement. Are the Botanical Garden Group going to be responsible for upkeep, maintenance, renovations to these buildings, or will the city be helping?
So, through you, Madam Chair, the proposal in front of us is what would be perhaps called by some as a public-private partnership. We like to call it a collaborative governance arrangement, where we're sharing that relationship with Toronto Botanic Gardens. We're really, as Richard said, working hand in hand on this piece. So we have $5 million in the capital budget and plan dedicated to some state of good repair work as well as enhancements. We've committed that to the execution of this master plan. And Toronto Botanic Gardens have agreed to work with us to raise the additional funds from other orders of government, from private philanthropy and sponsorship. So really we're going to work together to both enhance but also to bring up to a state of good repair that facility.
My last question. In the report on page 4, it says the plan also recommends relocating the operations yard to maximize the capacity of a space. If you're relocating the operations yard, where is it going to, and how will the city staff who are a partner in here, how are they going to still be a partner?
So the operations yard right now is right in the middle of the hub of where the general users of the park would like to be. So we're kind of in the way, tripping over machines and storage of materials and so on, and movement of the. We'll move this to the southwest corner of Edwards Gardens, and it'll be out of the way that way, tucked away in one of the corners of the park, but still accessing the park. So we still have staff on site, in other words.
So it'll still be in the park? And
it'll be a properly designed facility for a bigger operation, so that it can perform its role much smoother, actually.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Doucette. And we also, while we're giving thanks, we want to thank Harry, Helene, and Vaughn. Are you around? Of your hands? A round of applause because everyone else got it, so they might as well get one. Thank you so much for all you do for our parks. And another homework assignment for everyone is to get out in some beautiful green space up there in around Edwards Gardens. All right, thank you very much. So to speak then, so Councillor Robinson did. Anyone else from outside? Okay, inside is Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much. I am really, really impressed with where you've come from since 2012, when I think was the last time you were here. You were fighting along with the Hyde Park Zoo to actually keep your doors open. Different. Well, but you know what? As the Hyde Park Zoo, it's save the zoo, support the zoo, enhance the zoo. I think you've probably gone through the same transition with your board and with your members. So you are at a stage now where you have an extensive master plan. You have set yourself some amazing goals. And from what I have been able to read through, I think you're going to achieve them. So I do commend you. I think working with city staff, as I know from my parks, you know, Hyde Park and all my other little parks, is so important as well. They are, you know, city staff, city park staff have the knowledge and the expertise and can help you through, as can your councillor. And I know you've got her full support, if not more. Maybe she's even pushing you to, you know, make sure that this does succeed. So I just wanted to say thank you, congratulations, well done, and I do hope to come and visit again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doucette. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's always very interesting the way the city enters into some of these agreements with third-party operators on city site. But there's one cautionary piece that that I think Councillor Doucette got to. I have a very short motion, and this is just about the other lands in Edward Gardens. The City Council direct General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Rec to include a condition in the fundraising and construction agreement with the Botanical Gardens that existing and future parks maintenance of the Edward Gardens continues to be done by City of Toronto employees. I think it's very important for us to make that distinction, that while some of the additional work that's done by the volunteers and the organizations that we enter into agreements with, that our core work needs to continue to be done by city staff. And that's because for all the great work that third parties do and that voluntary organizations do in our city, if for some reason they're unable to continue to perform, continue to offer that, we sometimes get put in a place that we don't have the proper funding envelope to continue to maintain those facilities. And so I just want to make sure that we're directing staff quite clearly to continue the work, and that the work done in Edwards Gardens continues to be City of Toronto employees.
Questions of the mover of the motion? My question is just, have you run that by staff? Sure. Yeah.
Councillor Layton, I would have appreciated you letting me know about this idea. This has been years in the making, and then out of nowhere you're moving a motion. We haven't really fully charted the course, and so my question to you is, why are you interjecting with this after, I think it's almost been 7 years in the making, with all sorts of parties being involved? This kind of thing is so, you know, getting into the weeds and the details, it's not really oversight, and that's our role as city councillors. So I'm not clear on why you would move this at this juncture, 7 years into the process.
Sure, I'm surprised I'm being asked a question by an outside councillor, and that's being permitted, but so we'll see if that's the same at Public Works Committee a couple days from now. But I'm moving it because when I read the report, and from the questions that the Councillor Doucette asked, I think it's quite clearly highlights that it's not clear where the distinction is between where the city's employees are doing the work and where we have a third party doing the work. And I think we need to make it very clear that not in the Botanical Gardens component, but in the rest of Edward Gardens, that the work that is the park is maintained by city staff.
Okay, so thank you. So my question was just, did you work with city staff, or did you check with city staff on that? Or,
Well, we heard that city staff maintain this part of the park, but that perhaps that barrier is porous, and that may be changing. I just want to make it very clear to city staff that the intent of this committee and the city council is that parks maintenance be done by park staff.
okay. Any other questions? All right. So all in favor of the motion? Oh, sorry. Okay, sure. So let's just stand this down so that city legal can review this, okay? Can we stand it down?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. It just came out of the blue, that's all. Okay, thanks. Next item is, Councillor Doucette, you held PE 26.3 naming rights agreement for the TD Bank and High Park initiatives for the High Park Forest School.
Very simple question on this one to staff. Sorry, they're on the other one. So
We're going to do, Councillor Doucette's going to do questions of staff for PE 26.3.
I just want to confirm with the naming rights agreement with the Toronto-Dominion Bank and the High Park Forest School. Can you just explain to me what naming rights means and where there will be signage? That's really what I want to know. Do you want me to repeat that? Sorry. That's okay. I know you're dealing with the other motion. I appreciate that. So I'm on item 3, which obviously is the naming rights agreement with the TD and the High Park Forest School. I just want to know, by naming rights, what do we mean? What signage will there be, and how long will it be there? Those sort of just general things.
Sure. So, as outlined in the report through you, Madam Chair, this relates to an item that was brought before this committee previously that allowed us to enter into a fundraising agreement for a new capital project at the Forest School. So the Forest School is a heritage building located in High Park that's operated by High Park Initiatives. They do have a license agreement for the operation of that space and for the programming that happens inside. And so they've been raising money, and through that work have identified a lead donor who would like to contribute to that effort. And as part of that contribution, they've asked that the Grand Hall, which is the large space in the middle of the Forest School, be named for their organization for the next 5 years. So it is a naming that is in line with the policy, and the naming would relate only to space inside the building. Signage would be approved by city staff and would relate, again, only to space inside the building and would not be outside facing.
So no big flashing lights in the park?
No, nothing, no giant sign into Hyde Park, no.
All right, thank you. That was all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else with questions for this item? Anyone to speak? Of course, Councillor Doucette, take it away.
I want to thank staff, particularly Doug Bennett, who's tucked away in the back there. Doug works so hard to go out and make these partnerships. I know before Doug joined the city, he was out there as a resident building these partnerships, and I want to thank him for all the partnerships he is building, not just in my ward, but across our city. This is what this is about, is bringing in organizations who want to help in a city, either park or a building, but we also have to be sensitive to signage. You don't necessarily want big flashing lights and everything in your parks and in your buildings. So I think this is very tastefully done. TD does a lot of work across our city. I know I'm on the library board. They're constantly sponsoring programs. I think it's wonderful when they get involved with these sort of initiatives. They were involved with the Jamie Bell Playground rebuild, but they don't ask for a lot. They're very tasteful. They've already put some funding into operations as well, but this is the naming. So thank you for all your hard work. I know this building is going to be renovated. So it's not designated, but we know it should be designated at some point in time. But the work which is going to go into this building is going to not change the footprint, because you're in High Park. We don't want to change the footprint, but we're actually going to be digging down. And we're going to dig down into this dark sort of basement we've got now, which will allow extra space for community, for Parks and Rec, for everyone to use and appreciate. And I will say, when the Nature Center moved into this building 2 summers ago, they were in a very small building. They already have waiting lists. So they probably got 3 times, if not 4 times the space, and they already have waiting lists for children. They do amazing programs. They do programs for children and classes who can't afford to go to programs. They raise money to help that. So I think this is very appropriate. And I want to thank the staff also from the Nature Center and all the groups who use the Forest School. So just a big, big thank you to everyone. That's it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else to speak? Sarah summed it up nicely. All right. Would you like to move?
I would love to move this. Yes, thank you. There we go.
All in favor?
All in favor, unanimous, great.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. All right. Now we're on to our speakers.
If I could, sorry, on
Oh,
a point
sorry,
of
you wanna go
order, if we could go back to item PE 26.2. I think we have a resolution for the time being, and we'll just figure this out at council, that I'll withdraw my motion
Okay.
and adopt the staff recommendations. And just if I could very briefly, my intent is to ensure that by council we have a very clear direction about what work will be done by city workers and what not. And so we need to ensure that's done and properly with this agreement. So I'll withdraw it and we'll work it out as we get to council.
Okay. Thank you very much. So then, do you want to move?
I'll move the staff
yeah.
recommendation.
Great. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, Councillor Robinson. And so now we're on to speakers. So we're at PE 26.5, criteria for fuel and biodiesel of the City of Toronto. And we have speakers. We have 3 speakers. First off, we have Dr. Heather McLean, Professor of Department of Civil Engineering at U of T.
She just.
Hi, Heather.
I think it's.
How are you? You've been here before? No, my gosh. Well, welcome, as we said. Don't get used to this, but we're the friendliest committee. So you have 5 minutes to speak, and there's a clock behind you, which you can't really see unless you have eyes in the back of your head, or the clock over here. And I'll time you, and then we can ask you questions. You cannot ask us questions, sorry, but you can offline. And then after the speakers are done, we bring it into committee and we debate it. Okay?
Thank you. I have 2 colleagues here as well.
Right, I might have them, down, and so I have Dr. Daniel Paulson, and Dr. Bradley Saville. Do you each want 5 minutes? You're allowed that?
Yes.
Roger?
May I
Okay.
use the full time speaking? Or do
You're
I
going
need-
to take the 15
Yes.
for you? Okay, and they can add in if need be?
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee, for providing us this opportunity to outline the work being done at the University of Toronto to evaluate the impact of using bio-based diesel fuels. I, Dr. Heather McLean, the project lead, am a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, a licensed professional engineer in the province of Ontario, and a member of the University of Toronto Transportation Research Institute. I have almost 2 decades of experience evaluating technical, financial, and environmental aspects of conventional fuels and biofuels, and this work has informed industry and government. Other senior members of the project team are Dr. Saville on my left and Dr. Posen on my right, and as well Mr. Stu Porter, and bios are included at the end of the statement, but I won't be reading those. Overall, the team has a wealth of experience evaluating the life cycle emissions, costs, and infrastructure and logistical requirements associated with fuels, and have participated extensively as well in the development of Canadian and US standards for these fuels, including biofuels. The goal of this project is to assist Fleet Services to address the motion adopted February 27th, 2017 by your committee to report on potential greenhouse gas reductions and resulting costs associated with the city switching to use of different diesel fuels on appropriate vehicles. Our project is examining both biodiesel and hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel, also referred to as HDRD, and their abilities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the City of Toronto's fleet vehicles. While biodiesel and HDRD are produced from the same feedstocks, or can be, for example, canola oil, soybean oil, tallow, HDRD is a product whose properties are more similar to those of petroleum diesel than are biodiesels. As the project will be completed later this year, today we will provide an overview of the project expected value to the city and highlight some initial observations. So starting with why is this work important to the city? The City of Toronto's road transportation sector, as you know, is a major emitter of greenhouse gases, responsible for over 40% of Toronto's greenhouse gas emissions, according to the city's most recently released greenhouse gas inventory. This is the only sector to have shown an absolute increase in emissions since Toronto started tracking its greenhouse gas emissions in 1990. The use of gasoline and diesel in vehicles results in large volumes of greenhouse gas emissions and as well air pollutants, for example, nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, the latter of which affect local air quality and human health. A number of federal and provincial policies, for example, Ontario's greener diesel regulation and cap and trade system, as well as Canada's forthcoming clean fuel standard, provide incentives to shift toward increased use of bio-based diesel fuels. There is likely opportunity for increasing the use of bio-based diesel in the City of Toronto fleet. Such a move could potentially help the city contribute toward stated goals, such as the Transform TO target, to transition 45% of the city-owned fleet to low-carbon vehicles by 2030. Before such claims can be made, however, it is essential for two things: to understand any limitations, physical, financial, or logistical, in moving toward move toward the use of higher volumes of bio-based diesel fuels within the existing City of Toronto fleet, and secondly, that estimates of emissions associated with bio-based diesels are based on best available data and scientific or engineering methods. So an overview of the project. This project is exploring the expected costs and benefits of using bio-based diesel fuels in City of Toronto fleet vehicles. The research is analyzing the impacts of adopting different blends of biodiesel or hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel, HDRD, with petroleum diesel. For context, HDRD has greater compatibility with existing diesel infrastructure, but is not yet produced in Canada and is less widely available than biodiesel. The bio-based feedstocks being studied are canola and soy, both oilseed crops, tallow, which is a rendered form of animal fat, and cooking oil, as these are key feedstocks used for biodiesel production in Canada. We are investigating life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, air pollutant emissions, cost implications, technical requirements, including infrastructure and vehicle operations, specific to the City of Toronto fleet, and the impacts of relevant provincial and federal government policies. We are considering a range of biodiesel blends, taking into account technical requirements for biodiesel properties, along with seasonal blending requirements related to cold flow and cloud point of the resulting fuel. We are considering any bio-based diesel compatibility issues with the existing fleet, for example, related to vehicle warranties and material compatibility. This work will make recommendations for appropriate seasonal blends specific to the City of Toronto context. The life cycle-based approach accounts for greenhouse gas emissions associated with feedstocks, production, biodiesel production, HDRD production, fuel transportation and distribution activities, and combustion of the fuel in a vehicle. The emissions associated with using the bio-based diesel in the vehicles are compared with those associated with using the status quo blends dominated by petroleum diesel. We are also estimating annual greenhouse gas emissions reductions that could be achieved through the use of bio-based diesel blends. This work is evaluating known trends in how biodiesel and HDRD can be expected to affect air pollutant emissions associated with vehicle operations. The research is examining expected implementation costs with a focus on fuel and maintenance costs. We are inventorying existing City of Toronto fueling infrastructure and determining any necessary infrastructure upgrades and/or retrofits. We are investigating supply issues for bio-based diesel fuel blends. If an increase in bio-based diesel content appears to be an attractive option for the city, then we will propose an implementation strategy based on the existing fleet and infrastructure to have a seamless transition. Now I will go through a couple of preliminary findings and guidance. Recognizing, as mentioned, that our study will not be completed until later this year, at this time we would like to mention a few considerations for the city as it moves forward in its fuel procurement process. There are a range of unique factors, including this existing City of Toronto vehicle fleet composition, fueling infrastructure and protocols, operation and maintenance requirements, local climate, biofuel supply considerations, and so on that complicate estimates of the cost and feasibility of adopting higher levels of bio-based diesel blends. Regarding experience in using biodiesel in the United States, there are some major differences between the US and Canadian standards, fuel standards for biodiesel. For example, for biodiesel, the US relies on ASTM, American Society of Testing and Materials 6751, the standard specification for biodiesel fuel, B100, blend stock for middle distillate fuels, while we have the Canadian General Standards Board CGSB 3.524, 2017, biodiesel B100 for blending and middle distillate fuels. In addition to the 13 test property limits that are the same between the two standards, CGSB, the Canadian standard, includes more stringent requirements for an additional 4 tests and further includes 3 tests that are not included in the ASTM standard. Due to the differences in the standards, biodiesel in the US and Canada can be distinct, and information available from Minnesota or elsewhere in the US is not directly applicable to biodiesel produced in Canada or sold into Canada, meeting CAN CGSB 3.524, and by extension, the City of Toronto context. Life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of bio-based diesel fuels can vary considerably, depending on feedstock, location, the specifics of the production process, the properties of the fuel produced, and modeling assumptions of the analyst. The prices of bio-based diesel fuels in 2019 are difficult to predict, as there are many factors and policies in both Canada and the US that impact biofuel price. Based on currently available information, HDRD, hydrogenation-derived renewable diesel, will likely be more expensive than biodiesel. Although the feedstock for producing both fuels are the same, the cost of producing HDRD is higher than producing biodiesel. If the intent is to keep costs as low as possible, it is our recommendation that biodiesel, rather than HDRD, will be the logical choice for the city for 2019. Additional recommendations will be included in our forthcoming report. So in closing, improving the sustainability of City of Toronto fleet operations in a cost-effective manner requires a data-driven scientific approach and one that considers the city's specific context. We are grateful for the opportunity to work with the city on this important question and look forward to sharing our analysis with the committee. This work will provide the city with the necessary information regarding bio-based diesel options to ensure smooth implementation and satisfy any operational requirements. Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee, for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you on behalf of our project team at the University of Toronto, and I would be pleased to respond to any questions.
Sure, thank you very much, Heather. Do your seatmates have anything else to add that you might have missed?
No, not at this time.
Okay, great. So we have questions of the deputants, and starting with Councillor Matlow and then Councillor Doucette.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, by the way, for your presentation. And I heard new information today about the differences between the American and the Canadian standards with respect to how we consider what would be applicable in the Toronto context. And I appreciate that, and that's important to focus on. Along with looking at the differences, though, have you looked at, and if not, will you be looking at, as far as to contribute to your report, the common factors such as impacts on our environment, impacts on the fleet, on maintenance, and all those kind of things. In other words, standards are set by different jurisdictions, but ultimately, if you look at Minnesota and Toronto, or Toronto and any other jurisdiction, there must be some common factors as far as what impact ultimately does it do to contribute to the well-being of our environment. So are you looking at the common factors along with the differences?
Yes, of course. We're going to be looking at the specifics of the Toronto fleet. We have makes, models, years of these vehicles, and we have learnings from other jurisdictions, many in Canada as well, that will inform the proceedings of the study. We are also looking at the specifics of bio-based diesel production in Canada, what feedstocks would be utilized, and if we are importing fuel from the US, which does occur, then we would also be looking at those feedstocks and looking at the environmental implications of the production of the biodiesel, specifically for the Ontario context. Obviously, we can't know exactly what combination of feedstocks or fuels or supplier the city will have in the future, but we're sort of aiming to paint a full picture of these are the various options. These are some uncertainties involved because there's always going to be uncertainties, but we want to make sure that we're getting net overall benefits for the environment, but as well from an economic, financial perspective.
What are the main differences between, like, have you looked at Minnesota in particular, given that that's been an example that's oft used?
We have looked at it.
And what are the major differences and perhaps commonalities between the different standards that Minnesota needs to consider and in a jurisdiction like Toronto needs to consider?
Well, as I mentioned, the biodiesel that would be sold into Canada or produced in Canada would have to meet the Canadian standard.
What is that?
And some of the specific aspects associated with the standard are related to the storage limits. And so there's a much higher requirement for storage of the fuel, which is particularly important in the Canadian context and in the city context because some of the storage in parks or other areas is for considerable months of the year. And as well, we would have different, we would have to pay attention to the cloud point and cold temperature aspects associated with Toronto that are fairly similar, probably perhaps even worse for Minnesota, but the Canadian standard is more strict in that regard.
But, so for those two examples, if my understanding is correct, Minnesota on average has colder temperatures than we do through the winter months. So with respect to storage and all of that, wouldn't they have to be meeting just by whether it be regulatory standards or just by what's necessary,
right.
Achieve just as high standards as we would based on just what their temperatures are and what their needs are? Or are they not? I mean, would we have to go up and above even if our temperatures are lower?
Well, it depends on the approach that is taken and the specifics of the vehicles that are being used in Minnesota, the ages of these vehicles, the specifics of fuel storage, which are going to obviously be distinct between the Minnesota case and the City of Toronto case. And so we're looking at all of those specifics.
And based on your research thus far, are the differences, given that the temperatures on average are lower in Minnesota through the winter months, so their storage might, they might have to go even longer, or they might have to keep things at a lower temperature. Ultimately, are the differences material?
We're still working on those aspects. As I mentioned, we haven't finished our study, so it's premature to comment on the specifics of the difference.
Because what I'd be curious about is, while there's always going to be some regulatory differences, unless the new NAFTA agreement just cleans all that up, but ultimately, while there might be differences, would those differences be material to considering our context versus their context, or would it make a difference really? And I'd be interested in knowing that.
Well, that's what we're aiming to find out within the study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Amazing. When's your study going to be ready? Sorry, but
yeah. the key question. So we're aiming for the end of the year and expect some of the preliminary results by the fall.
Okay.
So.
In the report we've got before us today, near the back, there's a list shows a list of vehicles and recommendations on what B-level bioblend should be. Do you agree with those at this point, or have you not got that far in your research?
I don't think we are as far along to comment on the specifics on that yet.
Okay. Will you be looking at the difference in the biodiesel fuels and what their high temperatures and their low temperatures are? Because even just looking here, it's saying that the vegetable base is maybe better than the animal base. So you'll be looking at all those to give us advice on that.
Yes, the crop-based feedstocks, the canola in particular, tends to be the best for storage and use at lower temperatures. The tallow or vegetable yellow grease type of feedstocks tend to be poorer in that. So they would be better for the summertime, whereas if you were looking to use feedstocks for the winter, it would be more likely the soy or the canola feedstocks, the crop-based feedstocks.
You also mentioned a little bit about where the product comes from could make a difference. Have you been in touch with staff making recommendations? I don't know if you can. When we put our RFP out, should we be saying, well, the supply should come from this area and not that area, or one side of the border and not the other side of the border? I don't know if we can do that, but have you found that sort of information yet?
What we will generally be recommending is that any feedstock or fuel can be applicable as long as it meets the CGSB requirements for that particular time of year and meets those cloud point temperatures.
So that will be not just applicable, but also to our zone, our temperature zones and our climate area.
That's right, very specific to the City of Toronto.
Thank you. I am so looking forward to seeing your report. We've heard so much about it, and I would love it tomorrow, but I know it's not quite ready, so appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doucette. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Do you know of any other jurisdictions that have done a similar type of analysis, or any other post-secondary institutions that have done analysis for other jurisdictions? Specifically about the move to B20.
Maybe I'll turn that over to my colleague, Professor Seville.
There have been some studies looking at lower level blends, and Montreal did a study. Again, it was not an academic study, wasn't done through a university per se, but there have been some fleet studies. They have tended to be B5, B10, and have not focused on B20 or any higher level blends to this point.
So York Region, when they were switching to B20, or B20, I guess, in summer months and B5 in winter months, they didn't do the same study?
I'm not aware of a specific study done by York Region. At least if they did one, it's not available to us to rely on.
It sounds like it's not available to us either if they did do them. Are you aware, though, that York Region for their bus fleet is using a mix of what it appears to be about 50-50 B5 and B20? They're purchasing 2 million liters of B5 and 2 million liters of B20. So I assume that are you aware that they're using that in their fleet currently?
I was not specifically aware of that, no.
I had heard that they had been, but we have not yet reached out to them.
And have you heard of any other jurisdictions within Canada that are using, or have sort of escalated to B20?
I have not.
Not specifically. There's obviously interest in moving to higher level blends, but it's typically very cautious steps forward, usually starting at a low level blend and then moving up from there rather than a high level blend to begin with. That's typically been the approach taken in many jurisdictions.
Okay. The national standards of Canada, they've got a standard for B20, right?
That's correct.
That properties are clearly indicated they need to meet these properties. So if we were going to a Canadian producer of B20, they would give us a product that would meet those Canadian standards, and we'd know what they are.
You would have to ensure that you specified that they must be.
They must meet those standards.
Yes.
And given we understand the chemical properties, we can have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do within a specific vehicle, right? You guys aren't going to be taking all these vehicles and testing them on B20 and then measuring how much buildup or anything like that. You're going to take what manufacturers have given you and
results of other studies.
And the results of other studies.
Correct.
And
we
so that would
not have resources to test all the vehicles.
And that would include what the Canadian standards, what they went through to reach.
If there were information available for those specifics.
So essentially the agreement is, look, you take our fleet, one portion of it, because I know that there's the feedstock portion, and I'm not going to even attempt to ask questions about that because I just won't understand the answers. But you're going to take a list of what vehicles we have in our fleet. It'll examine which can function on, or what impacts a greater portion of biodiesel will have, and then that will help inform your conclusions that you bring.
Right, so we would be looking at any sort of stated trends in the literature or other information about materials compatibility aspects. We would be looking at issues about warranties. For example, some of the vehicles may not be warranted up to B20. Some others, the newer vehicles, more likely are. And we would also be looking at expected impacts on air pollutant emissions, because we expect greater benefits in air pollutant emissions for the older vehicles that may not have the sophisticated treatment systems on them to lower emissions. And so the newer vehicles would have better emissions overall, but the biodiesel would have a better, is expected to
Bigger
have a better
impact.
Impact.
Sure.
Yes, from an air pollutant emission standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Layton. I had a couple questions. So I've heard conflicting information. I've heard that Ottawa and Waterloo's doing this already, and then I heard they're not, and then I heard that they have just completed their RFPs. Do you know anything? Can you confirm or deny that?
I can do neither. But a part of our study is looking at other experience in other jurisdictions. So we will be looking into those things, but have not looked at RFP status and that type of thing.
So, and where exactly are you in your study? You halfway, three-quarters, a quarter?
We primarily got started late last year in the study, December, for example. And we have been working on characterizing the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions associated with the different feedstocks and fuel production processes. So we've been focusing a lot on that. We have obtained information on the specifics of the vehicles and have been looking to characterize which vehicles are going to be most suitable for the different level blends. And we've also been looking in detail at the standards, and have done that based on some of our prior work as well. We've been looking at the air pollutant trends because we feel that it's important to characterize not just greenhouse gas emissions, but a broader set of environmental aspects. As well, we've been doing some looking at supply issues associated with the bio-based fuels and distinctions between the City of Toronto fleet and those of other jurisdictions, and as well the specifics of the city context.
And you're all civil engineers and from the Department of Civil Engineering, and are you connecting at all? Is there any crossover with your environmental counterparts at U of T? Or is it just Department of Civil Engineering doing this?
Well, I'm a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, but I have a cross-appointment to the Department of Chemical Engineering and Applied Chemistry, of which Professor Seville is a faculty member, and his primary appointment is there. Professor Posen is in civil engineering as well, but our main focus is on environmental engineering, and that's my first degree was in civil engineering. Then I did a management degree, and then my PhD is in civil and environmental engineering and engineering and public policy, so a long title. But our focus is really on we have an understanding of the fuel production process and those aspects, but a very big focus of all of our work in the past decades has been on the environmental implications of the alternative and conventional fuel.
Great. And so you're open to going down the road for B20, like that's the ultimate goal until we get vehicles off the street. That's one of.
It is an option, but if this study were broadened to look at potential benefits and costs of a more broad sort of switch to alternative fueled vehicles, we'd be very open to that. And I think that the way of the future is going beyond these fuels and moving towards, well, first of all, getting more people walking and active modes of transportation and more efficient public transit systems. So our interests are very broad in that way, but taking the step towards biodiesel is in many ways a small step towards getting towards a more sustainable transportation system. But we've got all of these existing vehicles on the road. It takes a long time to turn over the fleets. These buses and trucks run for many, many years, so it's aimed at taking small steps to make improvements in the near term.
And then you had mentioned that it's kind of a cautious approach, which I understand, but you also know, of course, because of your environmental background, we're at times of the essence here with climate change and need to move forward, right? So it's kind of a balance, I guess.
That's right. Well, we are initially started out with this being a 2-year study and got sort of pushed down to 1. So we're moving as we're moving as fast as we can, but we want to make sure that the city takes appropriate steps and that there aren't unintended negative consequences associated with a move to a higher level blend or whatever move is made. So that's why we're taking this thorough approach based on scientific and engineering principles.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Anyone? Okay, so that's great for our deputants. So that's all the questions for you. So you can go and relax in your other comfortable seats. Thank you very much for coming down. Anyone else to speak on this issue? Any other deputants? Okay, seeing none. Committee members or outside councillors to speak. Councillor, oh yeah, sorry, questions of staff. I keep forgetting about staff. Lloyd, how could I forget you? Questions of staff, they would love questions. So, Councillor Layton is first.
Great, thank you very much. How many liters of diesel are we using in our TTC fleet? Or like, let's go citywide, because you probably know that number off the top of your head.
Through you, Madam Chair, citywide we use just over 102 million liters annually.
102 million liters. And that's all done through one contract?
That's correct.
And that one contract, how long has it been in place?
Through the chair, the contract initially started in 2015 and has the potential for option years extending it out to the end of 2019.
And is it, how does the price work? How does that work? How is the price set in the contract?
Through you, Madam Chair, the price is, of course, market price fluctuates. The contract itself in short terms is a discount, a fixed discount based on a floating price.
So let's take 2017. Have you tallied up all of our receipts and have a good idea about what we paid per liter in 2017?
Through the chair, yes, I do.
And what is it? What was the cost?
Approximately 90 cents a liter.
90 cents a liter.
Through the chair, if I can add to that, we have under that there is 2 types of diesel: dyed diesel, which is for off-road use; clear diesel, which is for on-road use; and gasoline.
That includes.
Yeah, so that's a somewhat homogenized price for.
Is there a way of pulling out the diesel
price?
price?
It's quite close to that. Diesel is the predominant. Out of 130 million liters a year is the total contract, so diesel's 102 million liters.
Diesel's 102 of 130, so the rest, okay. York Region. So they've had some experience with using biodiesel B20 for some time. Do we have an idea of how long that they've been using that for?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. I have all of that information. York Region York Region's fleet is exponentially smaller than the City of Toronto. I believe they're using it on about 100 assets right now, and they've used B20 in the summer for approximately 4 months and B5 for the remainder of the year, is my understanding, based on information that we've received from them.
And do you know how long they've been doing that for?
I don't. The message here.
So you can call a friend, don't worry.
It timed out on me.
You said 4 months for B20.
Through the chair, that's my understanding.
Because their purchasing is a 50-50 split between B5 and B20. At least their I've got it on here. The 2014 contract was a 50-50 split.
Through the chair, yeah, I don't have the time frame that they've been using it. Right now, 22% of their transit fleet, according to the information from them, is using biodiesel.
Okay. And that's the 4-month, 8-month split.
Through the chair, that's correct.
So they've been at least using it since 2014. I guess when we have an example of a municipality in such close proximity to us, having done some research on this, Transport Canada has research from Halifax, Brampton, Saskatoon of where they were implementing biodiesel policies. I'm just what added benefit do we get by being the ones that say, oh, wait a second, let's go to the University of Toronto and do a year-long or a 2-year study, but now a year. What added benefit do we get than when we have kind of case studies from the last 4 or 5 years at minimum of other municipalities making this shift?
Through the chair, so I can absolutely speak to that. York Region, for instance, as part of their communication, has identified that, yes, they have experienced gelling issues in the winter. So what that could relate to is transit buses not running. The same fuel sites are used for a variety of assets. As I mentioned, our fleet is exponentially larger and more complex than York Region, so 22% of their transit would equate to a very, very small piece of our fleet. So one of the reasons that we're looking at this and working with the University of Toronto is because of the size and complexity of our fleet, and to ensure that we don't have transit buses that don't run, fire trucks that don't run, or emergency generators that don't start when it's a critical instance, because the same fuel is used for all of those applications.
So where is it that York Region has reported these concerns? Because they're not, it's just not showing up when I'm searching for it.
Oh, through the chair, it was just in our communication with them. We've reached out to them directly.
Okay, because it's not showing up in what they're publishing online. It's also in the Transport Canada study that was done of Halifax, Brampton, and Saskatoon. It acknowledges that there are issues with storage, but it also outlines how you overcome them. And we do know one way of overcoming them is changing the mix, right?
Through the chair, again, this is just purely a fact-based analysis as opposed to jumping into something based on what has happened in other municipalities that may or may not be as fact-based or as scientific to ensure that we don't have issues.
Sorry, so it's from the Transport Canada website that we're getting some of this information from. So it's difficult to say that that's not fact-based, is it not?
Through the chair, I haven't seen the specific information you're referring to.
Sorry, last question, but we can do a second go around. Thanks. Anyone else to ask questions? Okay, I will, thanks. So, so from what I gather from what U of T said, and I'm just looking, did they already leave maybe? Oh, they're there. The B10 is more typical in Canada with B5 during the colder months. Is that what you understood? That B10 is more typical?
Through the chair, yeah, advanced percentages of it to this degree are not overly common. It does not mean it's not possible. It's just proceeding methodically to look at it. B5 in winter months is more common. B10 in summer months. It is, from what the municipalities we've spoken to, many of which Councillor Layton mentioned, it appears to be more common. Again, I don't have a comprehensive analysis Canada-wide.
And so the last time we met, TTC was in the room. And can you just go over what their concerns are?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. The concerns with TTC are specific to exactly some of the points mentioned, such as plugging. They've talked about additional diesel particulate filter maintenance, filters, fuel filter maintenance, and so forth. A lot of that appeared to be testimonial-based facts, so what we want is actual scientific evidence to equate to what would be the expected operational impacts, the costs associated with that, as well as the incremental cost of fuel. That is upfront, that is an absolute no, and that is the one fact that we do have, and that is a known cost.
And do they capture all of your concerns, or do you have other concerns?
I'm sorry, they?
Do those concerns of TTC, those are all captured in your concerns, or do you have extra, what are you concerned about?
Through the chair, the only other concern I have in addition to that is the fuel storage ability, so such as if fuel sits in generator fuel tanks for a year and it's B20, will that cause issues with gelling or separation, especially if the generator's in a non-heated capacity? I don't have those facts, so that would be the only other item. Beyond all of the costs associated, environmental benefits and so forth that we want to look at.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, councillors to speak. Councillor Matlow.
So first of all, I want to thank Councillor Layton for the leadership that he has provided on this topic, and he has consistently insisted that this committee and therefore council focus on promoting biofuels as an option. Until we, as the chair had said, sort of arrive at the promised land where we won't have to be relying on these types of fuels at all. Professor McLean earlier said that the long-term goal is to focus on a better, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially a better mass transit system, a more walkable city, ways to incent people away from driving in the first place. We can't force people to stop driving, but certainly if there are safe and walkable neighborhoods and a transit system that is affordable, accessible, and can get you from where you are to where you want to go, it is demonstrated that more people choose that option because it is a better option. We used to call it the better way when we believed in it here in Toronto. Unfortunately, we're not doing that. It's incredible how we want to do such a thoughtful study into the possibility of biodiesel, yet, and this may surprise you, I'm going to raise this, but when we considered ripping up a fully funded plan to provide 7 rapid transit stops in Scarborough without really any study or any facts or any information, with billions of dollars on the line, we just said, let's just forget about that and let's have now 1 subway stop. Without any, in fact, the subway option was approved without actually any idea of exactly where it would go or what route we take or what we do. Then we also decided rather than support the RER plan that the province has, that was also a fully funded provincial plan, or at least it wasn't fully funded at the time, but the province had said that they were going to fund it. We as a city put up our hand and said, no, we want to be a revenue tool. And then the money that now we're dedicating to what we're calling Smart Track, which is really just a RER with a few local stations, that money is now not going to priorities such as the waterfront LRT and other options that we need to be focusing on to improve our transit system. The reason I bring this up is because our city has a long history now of rhetorically saying rapid transit, creating walkable cities are our priority. Yet when it actually comes to policy decisions, we choose the political route rather than the evidence-based route, and ways to provide the most service to the most people with every dollar we have. So I think our city, politically, are complete hypocrites. That being said, though, that is our goal. The reason that Councillor Layton has championed this, I believe, or what I infer from his actions, is that he pragmatically understands that until we get to a point where we don't need to use traditional fuels for running cars, We need to be creative. We need to find more environmentally friendly options in between. And I share Councillor Layton's frustration. I'm sure you heard it in his line of questioning, where we don't, all of a sudden we want facts and evidence and have thoughtful processes to make decisions. We don't do that very often in this city, or not often enough. And all of a sudden we want to do that. And I respect the fact that we are. I understand staff has apprehension about moving hastily, as they should. And I am interested in reading the report. But I still wonder, though, why, when there's such a dearth of municipalities or other jurisdictions that have taken this route, where they have felt comfortable moving towards biodiesel, why have we decided to drag our feet in a way that I haven't seen other jurisdictions do in the same way? And I'm just perplexed by that. And maybe those answers will come once the report is written, and therefore I look forward to reading it. And there may be some really substantive arguments made within that report that describe why we would be walking into something that, if we didn't understand it, we might be breaking things unintentionally, and I want to know that. So I get that. But I look forward to moving forward with the procurement of more, not entirely, but more environmentally friendly options. And ultimately focusing our city in a direction where we are making it walkable, which means following through with our Vision Zero commitments, making sure that it's safe and beautifully designed. And when we talk about improving our transit system, putting our money where our mouths are and taking as much of an evidence-based approach with transit as we may be doing with considering what kind of fuel we're putting into the vehicles that we own. And perhaps if we do that, we'll build a better future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matlow. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll just speak briefly. The frustration that Councillor Matlow pointed out is a growing concern, because there just seems to be a rather significant reluctance to take some necessary steps. We heard that the 40% of GHGs in the City of Toronto are as a result of transportation. This means we've got to take very seriously reducing that source of emissions if we're to achieve any target that our city sets, if we set it as City Council or when we enter into international agreements. This has been now, I don't know when the original motion went forward, it's probably written in the report, but it's been several years since it's been, the direction was given for us to go down this path, and we've seen very little movement in that regard. When you look at other jurisdictions that are taking those steps, it kind of makes you self-reflect on why are we making it more confusing than it needs to be, and making it more complex. The Transportation Canada article I outlined was by the fleet managers in Brampton, Saskatoon, and Halifax 15 years ago, where they were running buses on various different biofuel configurations since 2002, coming up with some recommendations. And yes, some of these recommendations are the same thing we're hearing today, that you have to find the right biodiesel for the right blend for the right climatic conditions. You have to store it correctly, and in colder climates, that's a challenge. You have to clean the tanks. There may be more maintenance on vehicles, but other jurisdictions have decided to make this leap. Specifically, I outlined York Region because it's such a close, and comparable case study to us. Where in 2014 they were already for their biofuel blends. Buying half of it B20, 2 million liters of B20 for use, as we heard in the summertime. And yes, we will have to, and I think we do know that some of this is about a seasonal thing. We recognize that. I'm just not sure that the study that's going to come back is going to inform us much more than what we already know based on what other jurisdictions are doing and the research that's been done to this place, except for very specifically what the impacts will be on our city vehicles. And I think that's something that we could have done over the last 2 years quite easily, rather than wait to enter into this agreement. I think the lessons about how it's used are out there and have been out there for a long time. I'm hopeful that we can figure out a way to cut down the amount of time it takes for us to start transitioning our fleet, but it doesn't seem like there's a willingness to move faster than having this study come back. I caution us not to paralyze ourselves in fear of change when this study comes back, and probably, and this is absolutely no offense to the academics in the room that presented so well on it, that will call for more study. I'm really worried that that's going to be the case, and that's going to put us all back in those camps saying, no, you can't do it because the sky will fall, the bus will stall. Like these aren't lessons that at least are being published about York Region. Maybe they are true, and maybe those are relationships and calls we need to take more seriously. But let's not let the fear of some unknowns stop us when there are other jurisdictions that have been doing this for some time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Layton. Councillor Doucette.
I want to thank everyone involved with the UFT study, with staff. I have learnt so much about biodiesel fuel in the last few months. I didn't know there was a yellow grease you could use. Well, actually I did, but I didn't know what it was called. So this report is good, but I do agree we've got to move forward. There are other regions doing this. I like us to be the first, not the last. But on the other hand, if we're second or third, we can learn from other people out there. Transform TO, we've got a lot of the low-hanging fruit done. As Councillor Layton said, our transit is one of our biggest GHG providers, and that's where we have to come in now. That's where we have to step up to the plate. I also agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Matlow. If you build transit so it's convenient for people, they don't have to get in a bus to get to a train, they can walk to a local station, they will use it. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be doing that. So it's all a domino effect, a jigsaw puzzle. If you do something right, everything else falls into place. If you do something wrong, it doesn't help the equation. And I feel that we aren't helping the equation to get to where we are today. I do appreciate the due diligence of staff for this report, but I also agree, as I say with Councillor Layton, that others have done this. It's not as if we are being the first ones to try. Others with the same climate as us have worked through their issues. Let's learn from them. I believe that the UFT report will come in and say, yes, this is what it is, and we know it, and we're already moving forward. So I'm happy that we have done what we have done in the last few months. Instead of just renewing the contract for yet another year and delaying this conversation, we have started it. I think that's important. And I'm looking forward to us moving this forward. Let's not be scared of what's out there. Others have done it. We will. It'll be fine. We'll look back in several years' time and go, wow, why did we make that so difficult? Why don't we just go, yep, it can happen, let's do it. So thank you to staff for what you're doing. Appreciate that. I know you have to be cautious. I think the councillors around this horseshoe feel that we're not leading you down the wrong path. We've done some research, we've done our studies as well, and we are moving in the right direction, but we'd like to move faster. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doucette. Anyone else to speak? So I have a motion. We'll put on screen. And I'll just say that I feel everyone's pain. We aren't moving fast enough, and other municipalities are doing it, so why aren't we? Colder climates are doing it, why aren't we? I have been back and forth with staff a lot, as you have. We've had this come back and forth to committee a few times. As I said, Groundhog Day, and it was great to have U of T come and speak to us today as well. And we've had other deputants encouraging us to go faster. And so this is what staff and I have come up with, and I've been in touch with councillors on the committee who are keen, Councillor Layton, et cetera. And TTC was the last, attended our last meeting and they had some concerns, but they're keen on a pilot as well. So we'll look at doing a pilot so that we have a few things going on at the same time, so that we have the pilot going on as well as the U of T study going on, and all coming back with facts, so that when U of T comes back with their report, Councillor Layton, it won't be, I mean, it could be to get more information, but at least we'll have the information from this pilot to say, take action, not just reports. So that's what I'm moving, and it'd be great to have your support. Questions? All right, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? That carries. And with the report, all in favor, opposed, that carries. Thank you very much. And so next up, we're at TE 26.6, establishing ownership of the Eastern Gap Seawall and adjacent lands on the Toronto Islands. And we have some deputants on this item. So first up, we have Edward Horn. I just need my glasses here. Edward Hoare, if you would like to come up. Edward, you've been here before. Mr. Waterfront for All. Fantastic. So you know how it works? Well, you'll never go to another committee again after you've been with us.
All right. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here about the dock wall, and I've taken a picture of it. I've got two pictures, actually. That's one of them. So that's the dock wall. That's my kayak. I'm a lawyer and a kayaker. I'm chair of Waterfront for All. I'm out on the harbor a lot, as a lot of other people are in Toronto. So this is the dock wall that sticks down from the island. It sticks out northerly into the harbor as you're coming through the Eastern Gap. As you can see, it's in exceedingly poor repair, embarrassingly bad repair. Here's another picture of it, a little bit more atmospheric. So there's two things to note here. One is that people run out on this thing all the time. I went out by it yesterday and there were two people out at the end doing selfies and so on. That's a common situation. Kids run on this thing frequently. These slabs of concrete are supported by nothing but air. They can settle and collapse into the lake in any moment. So that's unsafe. There's a fence that's supposed to keep people out off it. That's been torn away long ago. The other thing is that this thing is essentially invisible to boaters in high water, as we had last summer. So you can see the peril, obviously, if somebody comes along with a power boat or a ski-doo or anything else and they hit this thing because it's 3 inches under the surface, then you're looking at potential fatality. So we're talking about a life-threatening danger here on our harbor. Also, this is kind of the front door of our city if you're coming into our harbor from the lake, and we welcome boaters and people in tall ships and whatnot, and customarily they come in through the Eastern Gap somewhat more often, I'd say, than the Western Gap. So it's a little bit embarrassing, if nothing else. It's a little bit like the doorstep of your house being all broken and having the weeds come through it and so on. So it's a problem. The question obviously is, why is it like this? I've been out there paddling for 20 years. This thing's been getting worse and worse all the time. Why is that? And council will know from reading, or the committee members will know from reading the materials, that it's essentially because there's a dispute between the city and the Port Authority as to who owns it. I brought this up with Councillor Troisi, who in the fall, and she did a great thing. She said, let's get an opinion from the city solicitor as to who owns it, and that is in the materials. It's a report from not from the city solicitor, but from the chief engineer and executive director of engineering construction services, and essentially it concludes that the Ports Authority owns it, and they have responsibility for it, and that is before you today. There's then a letter, two letters actually, from the Port Authority on Friday that say, actually, that's wrong. In fact, the city owns it, because they say that the water lot and the fixture on it are separately owned. I haven't seen the documents. I am a lawyer, but I'm just not going to opine on who's right at this point in time. But I think the important points to make are that as a member of the public, I don't see the question as to who pays as being particularly important to me. What matters is that it be fixed up, and that the question of where the debit and the credit entry goes and who's budgeted under gets sort of worked out later. So in that regard, I applaud Jeff Wilson, CEO of Port Toronto, for saying, as he did in his letter on Friday, that despite the fact that we dispute ownership, we're going to remove this, he calls it rubble, and that's probably a good description, and we're going to do it in the next few weeks. I think that's great. And I guess my suggestion to the committee, and I'll look forward to what the discussion will be, but is that this is not the only part of our dock walls that are in exceedingly bad shape. In general, that are in a state of obsolescence and collapse. They're rusting, they're decaying. There's very complicated jurisdictional issues all around the harbor, everywhere. Nobody ever seems to know who's in charge of anything. Everything gets worse and worse all the time. There's also a shortage of safety equipment, I think. That means ladders. There's more people around the harbor now, both on the shore, on boats and so on. It's not just an industrial area, more or less off limits to the public. It's where it's being redeveloped at vast cost. And revitalized. There's more people around it all the time. We need to get clear on who owns what and who's responsible for fixing it, and we need to arrive at a kind of a schedule to bring it up to snuff. So it would be my suggestion that this committee do all it can to promote the idea of some kind of a joint committee with perhaps the Port Authority, the federal government, which seems to be a separate entity, which owns different sections of it, and possibly the province and maybe some of the private owners, and I would suggest some interested members of the public to kind of work out who owns what. If an arbitration is required, do it, and let's get it done and sort of fixed up. Here there's an issue about, and I don't know the answers, is this an important break wall? I think it is. It shields the nearby cove from storms, I guess. I don't know how important that is. It's something that people go out on because people love it at the end. They take selfies, they take pictures. Should it be kind of a promenade with a viewpoint at the end? Very likely it should be. These are all things that should be looked into. I hope that the divided jurisdictions and the fights that we seem to commonly have and have had for decades between the different agencies involved will not prevent progress on improvements that are necessary for the beautiful harbor that so many of us love.
Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come down. Any questions of the deputant? Very succinct. That means an excellent presentation when there are no questions. Thank you. Anyone else to speak on this? Hi, come on up. What's your name?
Hello, I'm Pam Mazza.
Okay.
I actually did a written submission, but I just would like to add a little bit to Ed's presentation. I sit on a Harbor Liaison Committee, which is a stakeholder committee. There's no minutes taken, there's no motions made or anything, but I've been on that for many years, and I've asked the Port Authority, who sit on that committee for many years, who owns the Eastern Gap. And at one time, Lisa Raitt, who was the, I think, CEO, said that the Port Authority did own it, and then it went into a state of sort of, well, we don't know who owns it. So the other issue, so I've raised this many times. As a boater myself, we actually came into the harbor one night in the dark, and the navigation light at the end of this spit was out. And if we did not know the harbor, it would have been very easy for somebody to turn into the harbor and run aground on that derelict piece of infrastructure. I also know two people who at different times have died in their boats running into that structure. So I really urge the city to come to grips with this problem. And the other issue that I think Ed touched on, which I think is also extremely serious, is the lack of coordinated safety equipment around the harbor walls. They're hard-edged walls. One of the police at the Harbor Liaison Committee reported an incident where a young woman decided to commit suicide and jumped into the bay and then changed her mind and she couldn't get out. And the police found her sitting in one of the large tires that borders the harbor wall, and they managed to save her life. But there's very little coordinated safety equipment along the harbor walls. We're a major city. We host millions of people coming in on their boats, millions of people who come to the park and use the structures, as Ed pointed out. And I really think this city needs to come to grips with this situation. So.
Thank you very much, Pam. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for that information. All right, anyone else to speak on this item? Seeing none, questions of staff. Councillor Troy Z.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the deputants that came in support of all this confusion on the Eastern Gap seawall. My questions to staff. Ports Toronto has submitted a letter that disputes the conclusions by staff on the ownership of the seawall. However, they state that they're about to take action to address the safety concerns. Can you outline the steps that Port Toronto has committed to in this letter to the committee?
Through the chair, I will defer to Brian Bowen, who's with our Waterfront Secretary and has had some recent discussions with the Toronto Port Authority as late as last week.
Thank you, Michael. Through you, Madam Chair, if I may start with just one quick point of clarification. The report in question identifies 4 distinct parts that make up the Eastern Channel and Eastern Breakwall. And just as a matter of clarification to Mr. Hoare's comments, this particular segment is the one segment that is not, in fact, in dispute whether or not it is city-owned or federally owned. The dispute for this portion of the breakwall is, in fact, between whether it is Ports Toronto-owned or federally owned. So I just want to make that quick clarification. As for immediate next steps, Ports Toronto has identified to city staff that they do intend in the coming weeks on an urgent basis to remove the submerged rubble, the submerged portion of this breakwall. What they need to determine before they start the removal process, and they've committed to doing this with city staff, is to set the dimension that is still necessary to protect the beach from erosion. So a portion of that breakwall will be removed in the coming weeks, but we don't yet know the extent or the length to which it will be removed. But that is the immediate next step.
Okay, thank you. Can you summarize the condition of the Eastern Gap seawall and the safety hazards that it's causing?
As the city doesn't, in fact, own this segment, I don't believe we have access to a current conditions assessment. I'll look to my colleagues in Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. Richard, is that the case?
Through the chair, we don't have a condition assessment. However, as was stated, and as you can see, the wall is uneven. It's not like a perfectly engineered structure anymore. And last year, a lot of it was submerged for a lot of the summer. And so to answer the question directly, the hazard it presented was, 2 boats that would get too close to it. And if you're not reading your charts and not aware of the fact that that thing is there, it's not immediately visible, and it's under the water in a rather jagged condition. Whether that's safer or not as safe as or more dangerous or than an engineered structure that's perfectly smooth, I can't say. It's still made out of concrete, and it's still a hazard to boats, whether that's a perfectly engineered structure or rubble.
Just 2 other questions. Is there going to be any need to rebuild that portion, like that northern 100 meters, for navigational or environmental or structural reasons?
I can add one point to that, and there may be other engineering points to it. Our understanding in discussions with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority is that the structure is there, at least in part, to prevent erosion along the northeastern part of the island. That's just current, it's related to current. Whether or not the whole thing or half of it is needed, that would need to be assessed by coastal engineers. That's not something that we're aware of, and I'm going to.
Yeah, through the chair, I'd echo the comments made by Richard. I guess the other thing too, just to highlight in terms of the correspondence, that has been received from Ports Authority, and the fact that they have acknowledged and have agreed that in the short term that they will ensure safe navigation of the harbor of making the necessary repairs. That's on the short term. What's at issue then is the dispute in terms of the longer term responsibility. So we're heartened by their commitment to take measures and to undertake the necessary repairs at this time.
Great, thank you. And my last question, if the item is referred back to staff for further consultation with Ports Toronto and other stakeholders on ownership, are you satisfied that the immediate safety issues with the seawall will be dealt with while that process unfolds?
I think through the chair, based on the correspondence received by Ports Toronto, we acknowledge the fact that they have committed to making the necessary repairs, as I indicated in my previous response. So from that standpoint, I think on the short term, I think we have a level of comfort that they'll take the necessary actions to make it safe. And again, what remains as an issue then is over the longer term maintenance of that dock wall and the longer term fix, if you will, for the dock wall.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troisi. Councillor Doucette, you have questions? Anyone else?
I do. Very simple question. I know this is a seawall, but while you're having discussions about the seawall and ownership, maintenance, and by being able to see it when our lake rises in the summer, could you talk to them about the breakwater around Sunnyside at the same time? They also, I understand, own it. This summer, as you know, it disappeared. The only reason we knew it was there because birds were sitting on it. Another safety issue, we do have boats coming in and out. That breakwater does mean that some of our groups can do events and activities within the breakwater. So if you're having one conversation, can we just continue it further along our lakefront, please?
Through the chair, we can certainly look at that, and that again, through the chair, has been a long-standing issue in terms of, again, ownership, responsibility, and so it's been a long-standing issue that I think needs to come to a close, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Doucette, and I will just ask a question of staff that I heard from one of the deputants today, and that is this an important break wall? Does anyone know?
The short answer is yes. We know the break wall serves two functions, an erosion function, and it's also in place to discourage boaters in the harbor from taking a shortcut between the navigational marker and the shallower waters near the shoreline. So it is an important break wall and certainly requires urgent attention, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillors to speak, starting with visiting councillors. Councillor Troisi, and then Councillor Mallow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The seawall has been left to deteriorate to the point where it poses a serious safety hazard to our busy harbor. Boating activities are one of the main recreation activities around the islands, and watercraft and people are at risk based on the condition of the wall. This disputed ownership has left responsibility for repair worked in limbo. So my motion to council sought to move this process forward to ensure safety in the harbor. I believe the motion to refer for further review of the ownership back to staff to consult with Ports Toronto and stakeholders while proceeding with critical repair work shows the spirit of cooperation to making the harbor safe. Thank you.
Wow, short, sweet, and succinct. Thanks. Councillor Matlow.
I want to commend Councillor Troisi and her staff, along with city staff, for trying to figure this one out. It's, speaking as a Torontonian, my wife and my daughter and I, very often over the warm months, will park down at Cherry Beach and then take our canoe. We have a canoe in our garage, and we take the canoe out and we go through the Eastern Gap, and then we canoe along the Long Pond, and often park our canoe and get a bite to eat at the Rectory Cafe. So I know how beautiful the experience can be, but it can be far more beautiful if we actually pay attention to the infrastructure around us, so that many more Torontonians and visitors alike can really appreciate, as was well said, our front door. But these situations really frustrate me because, as was said earlier, for the average Torontonian, you don't look at that infrastructure and say, who owns it and who should be doing it and who should be paying for it. You sort of expect that government, whatever that means to you, is going to make sure these things are well maintained. It reminds me a bit of the, I don't know if any of you know about the immovable ladder in Jerusalem. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the most important sites in Christianity. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is on the land where many believe Jesus Christ was crucified. And the church is shared by 6 or 7 different Christian denominations who haven't always gotten along. So about 350 years ago, one of the denominations, I forget if it was the Ethiopians or the Coptics, but somebody put up a wooden ladder to do some maintenance on the church. And it turned into a violent confrontation in the square. Because it seemed like, well, if you were going to do the maintenance, then you were saying you own this church, and we don't. So it turned into a situation that wasn't a good one, and that ladder has been sitting there in place, except for a couple of small occasions, but essentially been there for the last 350 years, because nobody can figure out who actually owns it. And these denominations have figured out, though, while they've left the ladder in place, how to get along and make sure that the church is in good maintenance and good repair. If they can figure that out, we should be able to figure out between Ports Toronto and the City of Toronto how to make sure that our harbor is in good repair too. So again, I just tell that story just to kind of put it in context that let's figure this out so that we can move ahead with doing something important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Councillor Matlow. At least Subways didn't come into that. Yeah, okay. I don't have the power to turn off mics like Councillor Nunziata does. All right, anyone else to speak on this scintillating issue? Okay, I will, and that is because I'm moving a motion, and so that'll go on the screen, and I'm very hopeful that Ports Toronto and City of Toronto can work and have worked together and can work together to rebuild this wall and sort it all out. And a promenade would be fantastic, as our deputy said. So we're just going to circle back with more consultation. Seems that it wasn't maybe as fulsome as it could have been, and so we're going to do that and report back. And this has been worked on with the local councillor, came from the local councillor and staff. So all I's and T's dotted. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Troisi. Come back anytime. Last item, the item you've all been waiting for, the PE 26.7 Pollinator Protection Strategy. We'll start with some deputations. And we have Jode Roberts to speak first, and not to put pressure on anyone, but all deputants are expected to give the Latin name of Toronto's new official bee, metallic green sweat bee.
That's not. All right.
All right, you are no stranger to these walls, Mr. Roberts, and you've actually been on Metro Morning recently speaking about all the great things you're doing, so feel free, you have 5 minutes to wow us.
All right, I'll probably take 2 of those minutes. So thank you, Madam Chair and the committee, for allowing me to speak yet again about pollinators. I work for the David Suzuki Foundation, running their pollinator campaigns nationally, and have been running a few neat projects in the city the last few years, including the Homegrown National Park Project and the Butterfly Way Project, and as Madam Chair mentioned, the BIMBY project, which is the Bees in My Backyard project. So trying to rebrand NIMBY as BIMBY, so that's a work in progress. I'm also a urban beekeeper and have been keeping bees in the city and up in Markham for the last 18 years. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that I'm here today speaking in support of the pollinator protection strategy. When this process began 2 years ago now, I wasn't sure what to expect. By initially committing to become a bee city in 2016, it demonstrated an interest, but not necessarily a long-term commitment to protecting pollinators. Over the past months and years now, I've been impressed with the work of the city staffers that have been responsible for stitching together this plan, the comprehensive plan you have today. They were able to bring together academics, advocates in the public, and more than a dozen city departments to come up with this plan. So the plan is nuanced and ambitious. It navigates the increasingly complicated issues of conserving honeybees, wild bees, and butterflies in an urban setting, and the rest of the critters that make up our urban ecosystem. It sets a bold path forward, and if passed and fully implemented, would push Toronto, I believe, to the forefront of pollinator-friendly cities in North America. It playfully brings attention to the metallic green sweat bees, whose name I can almost say, but I'm not going to. See, that should be our focus, is everyone will be able to repeat the name, which I won't do right now. Metallic green sweat bees are really cool, though. And they've been dutifully pollinating while their honeyed cousins took most of the credit, so it's nice that we're going to give them a bit more love. The project or the plan will also support the growing efforts of countless residents and groups and agencies that are taking action to help Toronto's over 360 species of wild bees and other pollinators. The plan will also benefit monarchs and the over 100 species of butterfly in the city. And although monarchs, as it's been raised last time I was here, monarchs aren't necessarily the best pollinators, they are much loved and a colorful part of the ecological diversity in this city. So one of the items that's in this package is declaring Toronto a monarch-friendly city and having the mayor sign the National Wildlife Federation's Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which the David Suzuki Foundation is supporting in Canada. So Toronto will be simultaneously taking action to bring the monarchs back and protect our essential pollinators. So win-win. To conclude, I'd just like to point out that this is the first time I've been able to take a mic and not fall into a bee pun. So I'm going to end here and let it be. That's sad, I know.
You know this committee loves their puns, so get ready. Questions of the deputy.
Thank you so much for the advice that you've given us. I wonder, given all the buzz about this project, have you, looking through the recommendations, are there any items that we should hive off, or do you think that would sting?
Yeah.
You don't need to respond to a single thing I just asked. Thank you.
I think that was a rhetorical question, right?
Did you wish to respond, or no, you don't need to?
I'm going to take a pass. I think the plan is comprehensive, and so I'm not going to throw another pun on top of that pile.
I think any counselors using puns are required to read the Latin name of the sweat bee. Good try. So Joe, I know that it's on social media and whatnot. You're a fantastic BIMBY program, and it was on Metro Morning. Can you tell us how you envision or dream about the rollout for the city so we can help promote your great work?
So more than my great work, it's the great work of the city and a bunch of other groups and agencies. So I think the plan touches on a lot of these elements. So there's an educational component, so the city can play a role in helping groups like mine and others to get their materials and their bee propaganda in front of more Torontonians. But I really do think now it's a moment in Toronto where the conversation is moving, and we're having conversations, joking conversations about metallic green sweat bees, which my organization had little pollinator guides that they launched now 12 years ago. And the program bombed. So there were these guides to the wild bees of Toronto, and it was just ahead of the curve. People didn't really care as much about wild bees, or they didn't know that wild bees or all the rest of the pollinators were something that deserved attention. So I think we've really moved into a moment where we can start to push out and have these playful conversations. But also, there's so many easy actions. There was a tension about honeybees versus wild bees that came up, and I think increasingly will come up. But that was carefully navigated, and so if anything I can leave with the direction of this program at the city is that we should be encouraging wildflowers, and that wildflowers and simple things you can do in your yard to support wild bees also support butterflies, and they also support honeybees. And so there's simple actions, and those are documented in the plan that we have, and those will be the things pushing forward. But really, it's all about wildflowers and making subtle changes to our yards and institutional spaces.
Thank you very much. So 12 years, so there's hope for biodiesel. Thank you. All right, any other questions of our knowledgeable deputy? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a wild garden. Next up is Karina Otnad. Is Karina here? Oh, sorry. You've been here before, Karina?
I have, but it was a number of years ago. I was here to help maintain the green roof bylaw for the schools, that they would have the opportunity to build green roofs. And
fantastic.
Yes, so it's
right.
funny that I'm back here today to talk about this. To be honest with you, I do have to declare something, though, straight away. First off, thank you for the opportunity to have me here to speak, but the council and everyone in the room should know that I am taking part in the internship program with the Parks and Recs Department. I am a Gardener 3. I'll be completing that journey, which I was fortunate to take straight out of Humber College. I will be completing it on or before August 31st of this year. And since 2014, I've been studying the bees, the problems, and I actually returned to Humber College to find a solution to food security. And it seems that I went in looking for a dream, but came out with a mission, because the solution to food security that I came up with also seems to be a local solution to the global crisis of the bees. And I'm really here just to introduce myself to you and to let you know what I have in the works, and perhaps at a future date, I could work with the councillors and show them how I've developed something that can actually activate this very, very, very important plan that we have. Because the plan itself, as pretty as it is, as comprehensive as it is, it gives us an opportunity to build on and to actually make a difference that would probably ensure the future of all humanity. So just wondering if I could speak.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Oh, that part was just to make sure that I could speak as a citizen, even though I'm a Gardener 3. I don't want there to be any conflict of interest.
All right.
Is that okay? All right. Okay. Well, then thank you very much for having me here today.
That was very succinct. Okay.
As you know, I am a Gardener 3, but I'm also known as Queen Bee of Pollination. And I do thank you for making this plan. And I will just show you very quickly, because I know that time is valuable. This, if I might just demonstrate very quickly, is not only a very fashionable accessory that you might want to take to the farmer's market, but it is actually a pollinator garden kit that I would hope could get rolled out to the schools and the public through garden centers. And it's very, very easy to use. Everything that you need to create pollinator habitat and create organic food gardens actually comes in the kit. You just have to add the soil. In here, we include the instructions, growing guide, healthy recipes, instructions for creative crafts, as well as the seeds. You add the soil, put the seeds down, instructions and support will be online. This also fits directly into a milk crate so that we can make accessible gardens for any site, and it's transportable for the time that it is time to transplant the plants. But in addition to the pollinator garden, we've also developed one that's called Rainbow Salad and Tea Party Garden to draw that link between the bees and our food sources. And that's how the one kid actually can teach both things about the bees and the need for conservation, but also teach the school children how to grow organic gardens. So this is the only prototype right now in the world of the BuzzBox, and I am trying to take it from prototype to production, and I would be happy to avail it to the City of Toronto through programs once we have gone into production and we have the kits to distribute.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Any questions about the BuzzBox?
BuzzBox.
Any questions? You're connected with Eco Schools, Richard Christie?
I have been in talks with their executive director. They're very anxious for us to work with the teachers here in Toronto, develop curriculum through their lesson plans, and put that into the framework of the Ontario Eco Schools, that we could roll it out all over Ontario. My first inspiration to go down this road was actually from the Ontario government and the Ontario Pollinator Health Action Plan. And I really am very impressed with the traction that Toronto has made. And from what I can tell, we will be the first jurisdiction in all of North America to put our foot forward and actually start to create this pollinator habitat that, like I said, is really vital to all of our survival. So I'm very proud today to be a Torontonian. And I've waited 45 years for this day, because it was 45 years ago, just about around now, that I insisted that my grandfather allow the dandelions to grow, because I could see that the bees come there to feed. So that was the start of my journey. It started a very long time ago, and sometimes that is from where our mission comes. So I feel very proud to realize it now today, and I'm really close. And if anyone is interested, I'm awaiting the Dragon's Den to call me back, because I've already been through the interviews. Yeah, and I should find out in the next 2 weeks whether or not I'll be appearing on the show. And QP Union has been very supportive and has told me as well that if I'm going to the den, they would like to come with me and to show their support. So I think the most thing that I've learned while I've been learning about the bees is actually what I've learned from the bees, and that is to work as a hive. Everyone knows their role, but we work collectively, and there are so many good people that have brought this plan together for us, so many experts, so many wonderful pollinator groups in Toronto. We should be very, very proud. And what I've tried to do with pollination is to form it as a social enterprise that I can actually help accelerate all of their missions. I would be happy to help the David Suzuki Foundation, pollinators all around Toronto, to not only make the habitat, but also show them ways that funds could be created for our important projects, because I know a lot of pressure comes back on City Council for funding, but I think that I've come up with a lot of creative ways that communities themselves could raise a lot of this funding to make these projects really happen, and happen quickly.
Great, thank you very much. We wish you all the best on Dragon's Den.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, that was great. Okay, any questions of the, okay, so we just have one more deputant, and that is Leslie Gooding. Is Leslie here? Okay, hi Leslie. You got a tough act to follow. You've been here before, Leslie?
Yes, I have.
You look familiar, yeah.
I was in the middle of taking notes from the previous speaker.
I'm very, very pleased to see this pollinator protection strategy coming. I think it's a huge, huge, huge step in the right direction. And I want you to build on the speaker two before me. To protect pollinators, what you do is you plant native plants. Pollinators and their native plants evolved together. And they evolved together in one place locally, and they evolved in Toronto. Toronto, we have terrific biodiversity in Toronto. We have, and there's sort of a host of very complicated reasons why we have the climate, soils, history of plants actually migrating, but they need 11,000 years to do that after glaciation. And the sort of remnant plants left, new plants coming in. We have a lot of plants in Toronto. People have done a lot of studying about which plants we have in Toronto. Many of those people are City of Toronto staff. They have compiled lists of native plants that we have in Toronto. This is something that I got from the City of Toronto website a few years ago. And this is one of, it's actually 9 pages. And when I saw this come up, I thought, we have all this information. When we are going to talk about pollinator protection, we should make sure that the information of which plants are native to Toronto is available and readily available, so that people who want to plant wish to choose to put native plants in particularly in their own gardens, but it's also a resource for the city, that they know which plants, from which plants is the best selection. As I said, we already have this information. It's just a case of finding a way to make it available. And this is a list that I sent my councillor as an example of work that the City of Toronto has done. One of the things that I will also mention is a superb piece of scholarship which lists the woody plants in order of the numbers of Lepidoptera. Those are butterflies and moths. Moths are also pollinators. Lepidoptera species that those plants support, and I didn't bring a copy of that today, but that copy was done by a polymath who was working for the City of Toronto at the time, and he has made it available on the High Park Nature website, and I did send a copy to my councillor. And that is, there are a lot of gardeners nerded out, a very comprehensive list of woody species in Toronto that support Toronto Lepidoptera, many of which are pollinators, would be a highly useful resource that I would hope would be made available as part of the pollinator strategy.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none? Oh.
Thank you. And I will say it was produced by the City of Toronto, so I only claim waving it about.
So you're not going to Dragon's Den with that?
I'm sorry?
No, you're not going to the Dragon's Den with the list. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down and giving your ideas. Now we have questions of staff, and Councillor Matlow is first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as far as the strategy goes, in particular, how, and as I think it was articulated well by our last deputant, it's one thing that we know how to do it, but how do we make sure that residents across our city know how to do this? Because if we don't have, private residents across Toronto understanding how to, the import of doing so, where to go to get native plants, then we're not going to have a pollinator-friendly city. So how do we, what are the broad strokes of how we implement this strategy?
The chair, We do have education and train as one of our key priorities, and the big focus of that will be educating residents. And we've already been doing it for many, many years without a strategy in place, but through the work that we've done to build the strategy and the expert advice that we've received from our advisory committee, we've been able to put together some plant lists, some tips for creating pollinator-friendly gardens that we've been handing out all summer of last year, and we will continue to. So I think that part of just building on the community interest that's already out there is just people want to do the right thing. They want to know what they can do to help pollinators. They've heard about the plight of the pollinator in the media, and I think that we can make it really easy for them by identifying the plants. We have in the appendix a plant list that really breaks it down, very simple, easy to find plants in nurseries. We also have a plan to work with nurseries and encourage them to grow pesticide-free native pollinator plants and make seeds available, and have those items easily identifiable in store so that people can find those items and incorporate them into their existing gardens.
May I ask you like a question related to just some specifics? For example, like I recognize that you understand that public awareness is going to be a critical component of this, but is there going to be, for example, literature and like maybe signs that you give out to the nursery saying, make your garden, you know, part of the city, you know, Toronto has a pollinator strategy, or, you know, will you be part of it, or, you know, that kind of, I just made, you know what I mean? And so ways to like get information out there and maybe have information available at the farmers markets throughout the city or various places where we think we'd have a friendly audience.
Through the chair, yes, we are planning. We've been at a lot of farmers markets last summer when we were consulting on the strategy. We did, I think, over 70 outreach events just last year talking to people about this and getting their feedback. We will be at all the community environment days. Our plan is to also have signage for people who create habitat on their private property, something like pollinators are welcome here, or certified pollinator habitat, or
get the word out.
Yeah, something to acknowledge what
Actually,
they've
for
done.
my colleagues who are facing this way, if you look behind you, I'm just seeing some of the signs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of options. We just need to further refine the signage. And then also in our city parks, one of the key actions is to create a demonstration or model garden. One in every ward is the goal. And that will be accompanied by educational signage, including labeling the plants so that people have an idea of what plants they can incorporate into their gardens, what pollinators are attracted to what plants, and you know, use the city's garden as an example.
Thank you. And one other question, how exactly was the metallic green sweat bee chosen as our flagship bee?
Well, we can't take all the credit. The Bees of Toronto book that came out 2 years ago, I believe, suggested that it's Toronto's unofficial bee for a variety of reasons, and we decided that this would be an ideal opportunity to make it official. There's a few reasons why we did choose it. The first is that it's a very common bee, easily found in urban gardens and also in wild natural spaces in Toronto. And it's actually really easy to identify. If you can see in the photo, it has a metallic green head and thorax. So you may at first think, oh, that's a fly, and then you notice the black and white or black and yellow striped abdomen. So you can easily identify that as a bee. And the third reason is actually the most interesting of all. It's because it's also very welcoming. So we thought that that was a nice nod to Toronto as being welcoming to newcomers. This bee lives a solitary life, as many of our native bees do, but it nests in a communal fashion. So it builds, each bee builds separate burrows underneath the ground, but it welcomes many bees to do so, and they all share one nest entrance, so they have increased nest surveillance and so increased protection. So this is one of the few bee species that actually welcomes other bees into its nest rather than defending its nest against others. So we thought that was a nice acknowledgement to Toronto being a very welcoming city.
That was one of the most beautifully phrased and articulate and factual responses I've ever received of a question of staff. So thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Doucette has some questions.
Thank you for this amazing, amazing report with so many attachments. I spent a long, long time going through this. In here, we're talking about community gardens. And I know we don't have a community garden in every ward yet, which is our goal from 2001, or something like that. How can we encourage each community garden we have now to set aside, and it's not really even setting aside, to maybe have in the centerpiece a pollinator garden? Because that's an opportunity. It's wonderful. I mean, I've got a most amazing community garden, spent many, many years finding a location. It kind of fell into our lap. They've got beautiful vegetables and they've planted spring bulbs, but how can we have each of them do a garden as well? Can we mandate it? Can we be really mean and mandate it?
Try to answer that question through the chair. The staff that oversee the community gardening program very much advocate the goals and objectives.
Advocate, that's probably a better word than mandate, isn't it? Yeah.
Outlined in the strategy here. Furthermore, as new community garden groups want to establish, they all have to go through a sort of a protocol with our staff where they learn about the value of having a variety of plants. And one of the objectives of the community gardening program is to make them attractive to look at and attractive to more diversity of insects and wildlife, as well as to produce food. So we're basically, it works completely in an integrated way with the strategy before you today.
Because having pollinators in our community gardens will actually probably double, triple the produce they are able to actually grow, I would thought.
Correct, and,
Yeah.
and the produce that does produce flowers also are pollinating species. So there are certain types of produce that are producing flowers anyway and are being pollinated by pollinators and or are required as a food source for the larvae and so forth.
I know we're working very closely with all of our amazing city gardeners and encouraging them to plant more pollinator gardens. I know I've asked this before and I can't remember. I think the answer is yes. I just want to double check. When we are giving them the suggestions of flowers, plants, whether they're native or whatever the opposite to native is, they're growing, are we actually kind of giving, and don't get me wrong, the list for dummies? So it shows that they're actually good for the moths, the beetles, the butterflies, whatever, so they can actually see, and also encouraging the caterpillars, because even though I hate reading it in this report, the caterpillars are there to feed the birds, which then spread the seeds, and it's that long cycle. So are we actually really helping our gardeners when it comes to what they're choosing to plant?
Through the chair, yes, we are. In fact, not only have we produced a list, but we have a program of excellence for our gardeners, 7 different modules, soon to be 8, that the gardeners come together for, and we bring in speakers, and we talk about the different plants, and some of the gardeners get an opportunity to say how they've been successful with them or not, and why some have and some haven't, and we learn from each other. And so it's a very successful program. All of those gardeners are brought together at least once a year for that. And one of the very first ones we had was on pollinators, and one of the very first questions we had was, can we get a list? And so even staff, worked hard on putting together their own list. So it's very helpful.
And the list we give to residents when they're choosing to plant a tree in their front yard, which we provide, are we also looking at what types of trees we as a city would like them to plant rather than what they want to plant, if that makes sense? So we can actually encourage them. So maybe give them the list of trees which would benefit the city more, and the bees and the butterflies and everything more than one which a resident would go, oh, that looks pretty.
Through the chair, yes, we do. The inspectors are trained to circle one or two species off the list that they think would be a really good option in that location. And that might be looking at what other species are there and what kind of room is available in terms of the hydro wires and proximity of buildings and so forth. But it's also a list that is native mainly. And some of the work that we've done was with the University of Toronto Faculty of Forestry a number of years ago when I was still the Director of Forestry. And they looked at the presence of insects, and pollinators are among those, in native trees versus non-native trees. And of course, we learned what we thought, but it was confirmed, that the presence of those insects is much, much higher and much more diverse in native species of trees than they are on other plants. So again, it jives entirely with this strategy.
I have one more very quick question. Attachment 10, page 15. Can you switch Councillor Perks and myself? You have me having my Environment Day last year in Sororan Park, and you have Councillor Perks in Sir Casimir Park. Just switch us over. We happen to be on the same day, but if you could just do that, just so all residents know where they actually were. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Doucette. Anyone else? Any other questions of staff? I had just a question about the Agapostemum varensens. How's that pronunciation, number one? How do you pronounce the Latin name? You know.
Through the chair, I'm going to take my best crack at it. It's Agapostemon, I can't say that, varescens? Yes, Patricia knows.
Okay, good. I just need that. And so my question is, you know, and one of the deputants, Joe, had mentioned this, that 12 years ago this was kind of seen as maybe fluff, frivolous, and thankfully we are not there. We've come miles ahead since there. But to people out there in Toronto, maybe fellow councillor colleagues who don't understand the value of having a pollinator strategy in Toronto can you talk us through the effects on our food production if we don't protect our pollinators?
Through the chair, I think we all recognize the importance of pollination. It essentially is the transfer of pollen from one part of the flower from the male part of the flower, to the female part, which allows plants to reproduce. Essentially, they produce seeds, fruits, and new plants. The majority of our plants, about 90%, are reliant on pollination. Some are self-pollinating, but most require pollination. Most of that occurs through animal pollinators, and bees are the most efficient pollinator. There's a stat that I know you've probably heard. It's the 1 in every 3 bites of food is reliant on bee pollination. You can imagine without pollinators, our food supply, food security would be a major issue, as well as just the natural landscapes that we enjoy. We wouldn't have plants being able to reproduce at all. So I think there is some serious threat to our food supply, certainly, and the pollination service that bees and butterflies and moths and beetles and flies and all the rest provide are crucial to our ecosystem functioning.
And did you two talk to each other about your floral jackets today? Yeah. Knowledgeable and thematic. Thank you very much. All right, so speakers, Councillor Doucette, Councillor Mello.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is great. It's wonderful to read reports which actually get us excited about things we're already doing in the city and what we can do in the city. And I truly believe that every single resident in this city can participate.
Whether you have a big garden, a small garden, or just a balcony. You've got a little box. Simple. Plant something. Yeah, I mean, I used to encourage residents to plant vegetables on their balcony, and they'd come and tell me how their tomatoes are doing. This is before I was a councillor. I still do it, but slightly different there. But what we also have to make sure is that we have a pathway across our city. You can't have a beautiful, stunning park like High Park, which has tons of milkweed and tons of habitat for the native bees, and then have nothing. That's why we need our pathways. It's like our ravine system. One ravine needs to connect to another. So we need our gardens to connect from one to the other to the other. I was in Hyde Park yesterday doing my annual walking tour, and it's called My Favorite Trails. And when I end up at the Labyrinth, where I tell everyone I go and walk after a slightly stressful week at Hyde Park, Hyde Park at City Hall, wrong place, that's the place. I started talking about the native bees and about the butterflies. And I showed them a hillside which is made of sand, which Hyde Park is, where we know we have native bees living. You can see them in the summertime. In the wintertime, they're hibernating, they're out of the way. We also have the Nature Center, where you very kindly have supported some fundraising initiative for them. They have an outdoor space, and they have bee hotels, where, as you know, native bees don't live in a colony. They live individually, but they're happy to share. So I think there's more than one native bee who's a friendly bee, but I do appreciate the green bee. I think that's wonderful. I also love the idea, I think it was 2 years ago, I was told that there was there were bees living in the ground by a playground, and everyone was really scared that the kids are going to get stung. But instead of a city just going and tapping it down and moving the bees, no, what did you do? You went to put signs up. And the tickle bees survived. And the kids learned that native bees don't sting. They learned to live with these amazing bees, and it educated them. So we took that opportunity to show another community how we can live hand in hand. One thing I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand is the difference between native bees and our honeybees, and how they don't always live hand in hand. That is why I understand that when you have a hive, you have to register with the provincial government, so we actually know where these hives are across our city, because the honeybee can spread diseases to the native bees. We also, from this report, I think a lot of people will understand that it's not just bees and butterflies that pollinate. You've got beetles and moths and other insects which also help this. So I think this is a fantastic report. I look forward to hearing how many residents get really excited and actually go out and start planting. I know when I was at Canada Bloom this year, people were trying to give me milkweed seeds. I said, keep them. I have milkweed in my garden. We have thousands of milkweed plants in Hyde Park, so anyone can actually go and help themselves at the end of a season and help spread the seeds. Also, if you have a butterfly bush, it's not just butterflies on it. The ones in Hyde Park during the main season, yes, tons of butterflies, but they're a buzz. I have a magnolia tree and a Japanese crabapple tree in my front garden. And for a while, actually, Canada Post didn't want to deliver my mail because these trees were buzzing so much. And they're buzzing because bees and wasps were visiting them. There was no nest, but they were just literally alive. And those are the sort of things we can plant and we can help with. So thank you very much. And yes, I do love your jackets. I'm very envious. You know I love bright jackets, and I failed miserably this morning. I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. Your shirt is quite lively, Councillor Doucette, so that works. Councillor Mello.
So first of all, Councillor Doucette earlier talked about her tough week at City Hall. We all have those, and I just realized that the next time I have a tough week at City Hall, I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch a recording of Councillor Doucette talk about honeybees and butterflies. And just everything gets better. Everything's just in a good space. Do you have a motion that you wanted to move? I can pause for a moment. Do you want to?
All right.
I do apologize. I got so excited. I do have a motion, and it's basically adding what Leslie has shown you today. The report we have on item attachment 5 has some really good plants. But I know a lot of my residents already got those plants, and they want a little bit more of a challenge. So I am basically wanting to attach to item 5 the list of ferns, grasses, wildflowers, bushes, and trees which the city produced, which was on the website, should be back on the website, and it just gives us a bit more variety. So I apologize for forgetting my motion.
Thank you.
But you can see why it's so exciting.
Yes.
Back to Councillor Matlow.
I simply want to say that I wholeheartedly support a strategy moving forward. I want to thank, it's very clear that staff have put a lot of work and time and effort into moving forward with the strategy. I look forward to seeing those signs and that information getting out. I certainly, representing my community, will do whatever I can to share that information with people so they can contribute to the strategy. And I know that there'd be a lot of interest in doing so. You know, along with the bees, and I'm so glad that we are celebrating the metallic green sweat bee, and I thought that was a very good explanation of the welcoming nature of this little Torontonian. But also, I remember a few years ago, I was on top of a mountain, as I often frequent, but on this occasion, it was in central Mexico, not far from a town called Ciénaga de Allende. And I met up with countless thousands and thousands and thousands of monarchs who arrive there every year after visiting Point Pelee and spending time in our fair city. And it kind of built this connection between sort of how do we foster that you know, along with these pathways that we're talking about in Toronto, these pathways are going elsewhere as well, and I found the destination. So I'm really excited to see this move forward and see it through to fruition. I just want to congratulate all of you who've worked on this. Thank you.
Councillor Matlow, if you can say the name of that Mexican town, you can say the sweat bee's name in Latin, I'm sure.
I'll learn it in Spanish and share the word.
Thank you very much. Anyone else to speak? Okay, so I would just say that you know, we have such great information, as always, at committee, but especially today with all our different parks and green spaces and gardens, but especially this pollinator strategy, and I would implore councillors to move this information beyond these 4 walls, as I know you will do, and encourage your community to plant more native species, wildflowers and whatnot. And for those of you who may have residents who have astroturf on their front lawns or back lawns, I would encourage you to educate them about, you know, that pollinators aren't fluff, they're valuable, that our food security relies on them, and the urgency that if, you know, our pollinator habitat is reduced or compromised, then we're not eating. So it's pretty important stuff. And so we just want to get that information out there. Maybe you want, I'm sure we'll get information at our Enviro Days and scream it loud and proud about our new official bee. And thank you for this great strategy. It's amazing that we are Bee City. We've come a long way. So with that, we will vote on Councillor Doucette's motion. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Item as amended. Favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. By lunch. Look at that. Thank you.